Our reading this morning is from Mark 6:14 to 29. John the Baptist beheaded. King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said, he is Elijah, and still others claimed, he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, the man I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, and yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? The head of John the Baptist, she answered. At once the girl hurried into the king with a request. I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter. The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. May God bless to us the reading of his holy word.
Greetings to you, the people of God. I stand here in my very cold office and you cannot see it, but my heater is on right next to me, keeping me warm and cozy. I feel very privileged being able to share with you today, and I trust that what I have on my heart would be of great blessing to you and to your walk with Jesus. Mark, the first gospel to be written, is known as the martyr gospel. He makes it abundantly clear right from the very start just how difficult it is to follow Jesus. One has to remember as one reads this gospel that has found its place as the second one in our New Testament. One has to remember that Mark was writing at a time of terrible Christian persecution. Nero was the emperor and found some kind of reason to blame the Christians for the fire that had broken out in Rome. After he put the blame on Christians, you can just imagine how Christians were being killed left, right, and center. They became the most hated in society. It was during this persecution where Paul and Peter also lost their lives. Mark is writing under a whole lot of pressure as he puts pen to paper, resulting in the gospel now known as the martyr gospel. Mark knew right from the start precisely what it would take a follower of Jesus to make this commitment and to stick to it. When one studies the gospel, one can also read between the lines to see that Mark knows that many would fall by the wayside in time. Throughout the chapters of Mark, there are poignant pointers to the sacrifice involved following Jesus. In Mark 8, he records the words that Jesus spoke, saying that if anyone wants to come after me, I'm quoting him in the first person, if anyone wants to come after me, he or she has to pick up their cross. They have to deny themselves and follow me. Luke, of course, in his version, adds one extra word, saying that those who want to follow Jesus need to take up their crosses daily. Mark wanted very clearly for everyone to understand that following Jesus would have consequences. And this is our theme for today. The consequences of following Jesus. Very early on in his gospel, Mark gives us the account of John the Baptist's beheading. It is a grim story. It is one of blood and tears, one of gore and quite a bit of detail. One where John's head was placed on a platter of all things. You see, Herod absolutely hated John's prophecy, for John had spoken truth to power, and Herod did not like this. He did not like this one bit. And so John ended up paying with his life. Dawn Brown has beautifully read for us Mark chapter 6, where we have the detailed and dramatic account of John's persecution, of the price, as it were, that John paid. The author of the Martyr Gospel brings his point across very clearly, that those who follow Jesus will follow consequences. Or put another way, that if one wants to be a Christian, one better look good on wood. From early on, the disciples must have also known that they were in for a rough ride, that things wouldn't be easy for them, that there would be many sacrifices expected of them, that there would be a long path ahead. It was not like Jesus to beat around the bush. He played open cards with them, right from when he called them with those stark words, "Follow me." Just from immediately after, when they left their nets, they started seeing exactly what following Jesus would entail, what it would involve, and what price it came with. Not only did Jesus talk about picking up one's crosses and about denying oneself, he also talked about how the world would hate them. We have this haunting verse in Matthew 10, verse 22, where Jesus actually directly tells his disciples that the world would hate them, and I suppose 2,000 years later would also hate us for following Jesus. It is no secret, according to him, that those following him must know from the beginning what they let themselves in for as they make that commitment and as they take their step of faith. One can't be 100% sure about whether the disciples knew that it would be such a costly affair. But we certainly do. We have the benefit of hindsight. We have the blessing of experience. And I trust that most of us are now at that place in our lives where following Jesus is no longer something that can be compromised or negotiated. That we are sold out to the cause. That we have dedicated our entire existence following Jesus, not counting the cost. As the old chorus says, I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. Why are we so hated by the world? Does it have something to do with our value system, which seems to be totally and utterly upside down? When one looks at Jesus' preaching in the Sermon on the Mount, one can clearly see that God's kingdom system of values is far removed from the world's system of values. To anybody who doesn't believe, to anybody who doesn't follow Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount would not even make any sense. Many people would battle to believe it, to digest it, and to live according to it. For in this world, the values of the Sermon on the Mount could be seen as most unhelpful and most unwelcome. According to us, however, who belong to the kingdom, we know that it is the only way, and that even if we end up being the pariah of the world, this is the only way which we find beautiful, the only way of life which has meaning and purpose for us. I'm pretty sure that there are many people who look at Christians and see us as fools, see us as idiots. To others, we who follow Jesus might be stupid, or at least misguided, misinformed, and a little mad. And so we so often are scorned for our faith, mocked for our values, persecuted for our principles, and humiliated for Jesus' sake. John the Baptist was not the only case in history. Of course, it has its own drama to it, and I suppose when one reads the story, one can't help but cringe. But there are many others who have shown their commitment to Jesus by paying the ultimate price. According to what we have historically, it looks like all the disciples except Judas went through martyrs' deaths. And of course, Christians through the ages have often faced consequences for their faith. In the first few centuries alone, there were 4 severe persecutions, periodically but severe nonetheless, under the emperors such as Nero, Domitian, Diocletian, and Decius. Like I said, they experienced what it meant to have consequences for following Jesus. Today, there are also consequences for following Jesus. We who serve him, we who love him, and we who obey him are often laughed at, sometimes even by those who are dear to us. In one of his letters, in the second letter to the Thessalonians, in chapter 1, St. Paul talks about how he knew that those who would be reading this letter were persecuted for their faith. He did tell them that he admired them for their perseverance, however, and that he was encouraging them to keep on keeping on. One must also never forget that not only have we seen many believers facing the consequences of following Jesus, but Jesus himself had a martyr's death, for he ended up being stapled to a Roman cross for having done the right thing, for having spoken truth to power, for having defended the weak, for having fought for justice, for having helped the voiceless, for reprimanding the rich, and for promoting generosity in a selfish world. You see, when one goes against the stream, when one puts one's neck out, one can get into serious trouble. But this, my special friends, this is the way Jesus went. And if that's the way Jesus went, that is the way the servants have to go as well. Although, of course, there'll be consequences. Persecution looks very different nowadays. Chances are very small that you or I would end up on a cross, or skinned alive, or drawn and quartered, or burnt at the stake. Beheading seems to no longer be a possibility. But there are other ways in which we suffer for the sake of the gospel. There are other ways in which we make sacrifices because of our love for Jesus. I want to say here over and over again that it is not easy, but it is always worth it. You see, as I continue to think of other alternatives of how I could spend my life, nothing entices me, nothing draws me, and nothing intrigues me. Only Jesus. I don't see any other way worthy of living except in the service of Him who saved and liberated me. Are you being persecuted currently? Is there something bothering you at this stage of how a husband or a wife or a mom or a dad or a child or a brother or a sister is teasing you because of your faith? Is taunting you because of your love for Jesus? I want to encourage you today by saying to you, hang in there. Don't give up. For those who endure to the end will receive the crown of life. Revelation 2, verse 10. Some people who I share the message of Jesus with never come to understand that this journey is not filled with moonlight and roses. When I meet new people, introducing Jesus to them, clearly noticing that they don't have much background, I can just see the twinkle come in their eye because they think that everything will be wonderful on this walk. I then quickly have to bring them down to earth, telling them that there will probably be some cost involved, that the cross will be rather heavy, and that the self-denial will be very challenging. I emphasize this over and over again, however, telling to all who are willing to listen that I don't know of any other way more rewarding, more exciting, and believe it or not, more happy than following Jesus. We've covered quite a bit of the negative consequences for following Jesus, but there are also some positive stuff, for one keeps on learning and one keeps on living. Some of the positive consequences of following Jesus is that fulfilling feeling of knowing that you are doing God's will. The rewarding feeling of knowing that you are living a life which puts a smile on God's face. And then, of course, there is that special treasure in heaven, which Jesus prepares for all those who love Him and who stick it out to the very end. In the gospel, we have the promise of Jesus that if we don't give up, that if we remain faithful, that if we follow him without counting the cost, we will one day hear these words which will be like sweet music to our ears as he receives us into his eternal care. Well done, good and faithful servant. The account of John the Baptist's beheading is an alarming account because it shows us how difficult things can become. The stories of the apostles are no less daunting and harrowing. But we need to figure out, you and I both need to figure out how most effectively and how most meaningfully to follow Jesus in a modern day world. How to let our light shine during this destructive pandemic, and how to bring hope to the hopeless in spite of what this virus is doing to the nations. It might not be easy, but I give you my word, it will be worth it. Amen.